And if you're not pumped up for day 2 after a video like that, I don't know what could get you ready for such an exciting day and week. We're going to jump right in because our time with you this morning is short, but thank you all for joining us. We have a distinguished panel of tech executives here with us and lots to get to. So why don't I just start with asking everybody, tell us maybe just a little bit about your work and what's got you most excited about big tech and the tech universe.
Sure. So I'm from Nasdaq, and we are not only known as the large equity exchange in the U.S., but less known for the technology company that we've become with market technology and providing the technology to many of the world's exchanges. So the trend that we're on the tipping point of is that I'm really excited about is the adoption of the cloud, paired with the ability to take your services and turn them into consumable APIs. So those two things coming together, I think, are creating a great opportunity for us to decompose what we perfected over many years in financial services and make those available to marketplaces outside of financial services.
Hi, I lead two functions at Microsoft. I lead corporate strategy and our internal operations as well, so our internal tech systems and transactioning systems. And I think, building what Brad said, I think the cloud and it being a worldwide footprint is really changing the game in financial services. And so we tend to partner with the folks that we do business with, and so we see new innovation going on at the small startup level with companies like ClearBank, basically building an API-based bank for clearance. We see people at the larger size companies that are needing to transform to drive down cost, and the cloud, the worldwide footprint of the cloud is enabling them to do that. And we also see it creating a democratization of some technologies that never could exist if it were just for you building that in a data center itself. So for instance, AI, there are not that many cloud-based infrastructures that can do AI and those models at the extent and depth that is developing. And so having that available basically just by signing in is really exciting in terms of the new opportunities it creates.
And from my perspective, we have been in the forefront of innovation for a long time. We are proud to be the platform for innovation, working with our partners in industry, in tech industry, as well as vertical industries across the globe. And I think what brought me to this event is to understand more where our customers want to go, where our partners is going to be, or future partners is going to be, and hopefully working together to drive this innovation changes across industries, especially financial institutions, much faster and much reliable.
So this is an interesting question because I think so often we associate tech disruption with startups and maybe not necessarily with large companies like yours. And a recent World Economic Forum report highlighted that perhaps some or the majority of disruption in financial services comes from perhaps large tech companies versus startups. And maybe the same is true with other industries. So I'd love to hear you each weigh in on how you think about disruption from startups versus more established companies like your own.
Sure. So you want me to start?
Sure.
Okay. So I would say certainly we had a discussion backstage about what constitutes big tech, and I would say we're here in Asia, so we want to have a broad view of some of the companies that are absolutely getting into cloud and making the major investments into cloud, and also the huge consumer firms that have developed over the last few years. So I would say that those firms are capable competitors whatever industry they enter. So let me say that first. And if they choose to enter financial services, watch out. So that would be my first point. And they have most of them have been in one industry and at least added an adjacent one that built off of their strength already. So the question for me would be, which is financial services the next logical industry for them to enter? And in many cases, I think the answer is yes, and it would be from the payment standpoint. So I would see them, if you look at You already have Alipay, we have Google Pay out here, we have the Apple Card. Amazon's largest cost is payments, the payment costs. So you could see that being the logical place that if you're a banker, you're a traditional incumbent in payments, you probably need to really pay attention to big tech. That said, though, I would say there's examples like us. We're going the other way. So we're a financial services firm, and we're moving into tech. I would also say that all the the startups that are here, it is really hard for a big company to really serve the needs of their customers, and there are still major advantages to a startup and a fintech company. So I don't think it's an all or nothing. I think, and companies like Stripe have come out of nowhere to be major challengers in payments themselves. So I would say it's still going to come from traditional disruptors and startups, but the big tech will play a major role.
I think it's going to actually come from both places. I think you're going to see that the cloud in particular and the cost requirements for traditional banking is going to cause them to move to the cloud and to actually disrupt themselves. If we look at our industry in particular, if you're not disrupting yourself and figuring out where the puck is going, then you're going to be left behind. And we see an imperative among large vendors and large banks and financial institutions to move to the cloud, to become more efficient by virtue of that, and then to drive their own innovation agenda. So you're going to get things like automated agents that you can talk to about financial advice. And those are going to come from large players, but they're also going to be disruption. So look at our industry, companies like LinkedIn that didn't exist and now are huge in terms of the business social network. Those kinds of companies are going to emerge. They are emerging in financial tech. And then you're going to get non-traditional players that are, as Brad said, are going to move down into adjacencies like, I think transactions are going to be a big part of that. And the interesting thing, the exciting thing about being in the industry is you're not sure how it's all going to play out. But you're in this churn period that's going to last several years where it's all going to shake out along new models of how you do banking, new consumer experience models. And it's just a question of who's going to get there.
And really I agree with Kurt. So we think that fintechs, insurtechs, and companies that they can move fast, they have the ability to come up with innovative ideas and test it frequently. Whereas the larger companies like ourselves and our partners, we are looking into stabilizing that innovation and bringing it to the mass and enable that capabilities in a larger scale. So that's why we work with fintech and startup companies, insurtechs, regtech, etc., and enable them with the technology, advanced technology, to actually make their idea in reality, right? And I think that's where it really dynamic is. We benefit from each other, and we deliver to solve the customer's problem. And I think that's where we are merged together to be successful.
So let me ask you on that point, because you've now talked about partnership in both your answers. I'd love to hear you expand a little bit on how you approach partnering with incumbent financial institutions, with startups, with regulators, and how you make that all work.
It's a good point. So the collaboration from our perspective is not just a luxury, right? It's a necessity, especially nowadays. And it is really important that we work together. Big tech companies with institutions, different medical industries, especially here in financial services, as well as regulators. Because if we work together as a team, we introduce technology, everyone understands the capabilities that technology brings to the table. We understand the impact of technology, so regulators are testing, analyzing, and so we work together. When the technology is ready to come to the market and adopted by financial institution, regulators are already part of the team and they approve and certify that kind of technology. That makes it much faster for adopting new technology and solving a real-world problem, which all of us got together really to solve the people problem. It's not just for us. And that's really a benefit.
I want to come back to the theme of regulatory innovation a bit later, but Kurt, let me ask you, you mentioned trying to anticipate where the puck is going, and you've been an executive in tech, you've also done work in government. How do you do that as a leader? How do you anticipate where the puck is going and then get your institution ready to follow up on that, to execute on it?
Well, there's a couple of things. First, we get signal from a lot of our partners, and you have to sift through that because there's a lot of ideas out there. Some are going to make it and some of them aren't. And so you develop what your intuition tells you about which of these signals are really going to have some strength coming to them. And that's a big part of it. I mean, if you think about Microsoft's transformation, we were talking backstage, it started 15 years ago when we said, well, we have traditional on-premises businesses like Office, like our server business. We saw where things were going even back then when I was leading the Office division. We said what we have today is not going to be what people are going to demand in the future. And so you make those first investments and then you look for traction. And you make those investments, but in some places you just say, I'm all in, and this is the direction that things are going. I think it's similar in financial services. You look for those patterns that exist. You look for what startups are doing. You hear from larger companies, what is it that they want to accomplish? What are the needs that they have? Because larger companies and larger financial institutions, they need to drive down the cost curve. They need to have a more consumer-oriented experience for their users. And so you take all of that synthesis, you develop a vision of where the industry is going. You figure out what your investment roadmap is to get you there, and then you figure out what your partnerships are going to look like. You create a platform, you do certain things available to everybody for broad reach, and then you do deep partnerships with companies you really want to bet on together.
I'd love to hear you weigh in on this as well, because Nasdaq has been, in some ways, both a financial services incumbent, but now an innovator in the space, and as you said, moving more to big tech as well, maybe outside of financial services. So I'd love to hear your view on this as well.
Yeah, so a big part of my job is to try and do what Kurt said, was to really look at the outside world and translate back what I think are the most important trends for our business. And to do that continuously, so I think our leadership team is fairly enlightened as to what is the opportunity out there. And what Kurt mentioned, it started 15 years ago at Microsoft, and it's a remarkable turnaround. So maybe the other conclusion is it takes a lot longer than we think, right?
It always moves not quite as fast as you'd like it.
Yeah, so we can see it, we get excited about it. And I think some of the things that we're talking about and have been talking about, modernizing distributed record keeping. I went back and found some original documents from the SEC, and when they had the paper crisis and you had mainframe technology and we centralized everything, in those documents they talk about eventually decentralizing it again. So back in the late 60s, the early 70s, they realized, because if you think about the original record keeping was paper, it's decentralized to the individual. We own the certificate. So it was a temporary thing that hasn't been undone yet. So here we got pretty excited, everyone did, about modern record keeping with blockchain, and it's going to take many years, but it is going to happen. And so I think that's a pretty exciting piece. And then the other one is I think a big mistake that a lot of technology organizations had is the standardization push. So it was like, let's just rationalize our suppliers down to a small number. And what that did is it really blinded you from all the innovation. So I would say every year you should look at who your suppliers are. And if you don't have any new ones, you probably aren't really challenging yourself enough. So, and all the companies, the biggest frustration is, how do I get through the purchasing door? How do I get a piece of paper that says I can even do business with companies? So I think that's one of the biggest simple improvements that someone can do, is just to say, who am I doing business with, and has it changed? And if it hasn't, you probably aren't being aggressive enough.
And so how do you think about, in terms of picking your partner suppliers, maybe advising some of the companies you work with to do just that, to do that assessment that you've just talked about?
Yeah, so I'm like a kid in a candy store. So if you think about the other part of the business we have, it's called the listings business. And so we globally, and we have Bob McCooey, one of my colleagues, is here representing the listings business, but our job is to welcome, and it's a very competitive business, to welcome any great company to list on Nasdaq. So the role that I can play in that is to get to know all those companies. So I regularly spend time just trying to understand what are the trends and who are also the companies behind those trends. And that's a really fun part. If you think about it, it's like if you love chocolate and you got to work for See's Candy or something, or Lindt chocolate. So I would say that's the other thing is engage where in places like this. We have a whole, and I have to say it's very impressive, all the talent and the tech companies that have assembled here, and all of the regulators and the big tech companies. It's quite unique.
Well, so you all work at multinational companies, and we're here in Singapore, and we're all thinking about, they just announced it was Alibaba and Singles Day and the record sales that they had. So how do you think about innovations that are happening in different parts of the world and manage the different technologies and the pace of innovation, say in the U.S. versus in parts of Asia?
A few things. The first thing is that markets are not homogeneous. They are different from various places. There's an underlying piece that's consistent. So when you build platforms, there's a certain set of capabilities you just have to build worldwide. But then we look for signals that come out of Asia. We look for the startup community and what is its take on the market, and how do we both create consistent platforms for everybody, but then how do we go big with particular startups that we think we have something going on? How do we go with the regional players, the large banks, et cetera, in those regions and meet their needs as well? So you end up with something that has a consistent base, but then changes and distinct flavors that are in different markets. The other thing that's really critical for us is to actually be in those markets ourselves. And so that means having a presence here, that means having partnerships here, it means recruiting tech capabilities here as well. And so you have to be on the ground and feeling those signals, and then getting that early signal, adapting your play, and moving from there. But there's a consistency, but with flavors that are different around the world. And then the final thing I'd say is each of these regions and the players in those regions are wanting, particularly in the financial services business right now, are wanting to connect up into a global capability as well. So you have to think about interface standards like blockchain that you talked about in terms of that being a key capability, but also trade standards, the way systems interconnect, and figure out how those players are going to work together as well.
So what we are seeing is there is no shortage of challenges, and none of us have the answer for all of them. So that's where we talked about Alibaba and Tencent and so forth, and large companies, Microsoft, Nasdaq. We work with all to understand the challenges, to understand what we can bring to the table, what is the gap, and we jointly address that. So we work with Alibaba in a number of projects, from cloud computing to artificial intelligence. We work with Tencent as well as Nasdaq. We continuously work together. And I believe that this is really a foundation for up-leveling the capabilities that our companies can bring to the table and solve people's problems and make it much easier for them to take advantage of services that, in this case, financial services offer. And this is really enabling us to create a new generation of technology as well, based on innovative thinking that out of the box have functionality. And I hope, as I mentioned before, with regulators getting in the game, that is out of the box is approved to be used moving forward. And I'm going to compliment Maz. We have been working with Maz on federated analytics and going forward, federated learning, that we are looking into now to solve some of the challenges that are a roadblock, especially data. And we get to that later, to solving the sovereignty problems and privacy issues, etc. And I think this is going to be really a fruitful collaboration between all of us and increase the expansion of capabilities for everyone across the planet.
Do Want to weigh in on this as well?
Yeah, I just want to agree with one of Kurt's main points, that it's best when you're in the market yourself with a product and a business. And I never like to have a development team where we don't have a product in their country, because it disconnects them from what they do for customers. So we had been in India for a while, and we just recently have a relationship with National Stock Exchange of India, and it gives our employees purpose to see their potential product in market. So I think that's a very important thing. We're fortunate to have through acquisition, we have a lot of offices around the world. So I would say that's the biggest way to tap into what's going on there is to have employees that can tell you what's going on. And the other thing is you then have labs around the world. So some parts of the world are ready for new innovations, and they may be behind, just like with the wireless. We were talking about telecommunications getting into financial services because the wireless providers leapfrogged in parts of the world. So we also look for where's that particular mix of a regulator, the customer, and our capability that we can try something new. And we don't have to force it in the U.S. And that used to be the old way, is let's put it in the U.S. first and then everyone else will follow. And I think that's changed. It's very much find the place that's ready for it, and it all aligns, and then use that as your lab.
Well, and you've all touched in part of your answer, and perhaps Kirk most explicitly, on talent. Right? All of this comes down to the need to find great talent, but what we hear often is about the war for talent. How do you find tech-savvy employees, especially when you're a multinational corporation dealing with different cultures, different capabilities from a technology point of view? So how should folks in the audience think about making sure they have the right talent to bring to bear to all these challenges?
Well, the interesting thing there, first have your kids go to computer science. I think that's probably number one.
Make sure they're off the dole early.
Exactly. It's interesting because if you think about the transformation that's going on, and I obviously have a biased perspective, but I think it's true. The role that technology is playing in all of the companies across the world is massive. We talk about tech intensity and measuring how much you're on the forward foot by how much software and services are a component of the products that you build. And historically, it's been quite low. Moving forward, it's quite high. And so that gets to the point where the developers that you have in your organization are central to essentially the essence of what your company is. And that, for us internally, that's always been true of the product groups. But I took on the core operations team and our core systems development. And it used to be our IT team. We no longer have an IT team. We think of them as product developers. The only difference they do is they build the internal systems that power Microsoft instead of building the products that our customers consume. And so I think you need to think about your software and tech talent as an integral part of the products that you build and deliver to the market. That will then get those tech folks excited about being part of the core mission. They're not part of an IT organization. They are part of the core future of the company. And you'll get those brains thinking about what does the innovation look like. I think there's always going to be an opportunity because people love to work locally. And so and they love to work for local companies. And we're always, we are a very large company worldwide, and we appeal to people that don't want to be on the cutting edge technology-wise, but there's a real appeal to being part of these local organizations, bringing up your community. And I think selling the fact that you're an integral part of the future of the company are real keys there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the war for talent is really interesting. You mentioned you got to tell your kid to have a CS degree. But I also thinking that we are going to a direction that we do need a lot of cultural change. So it's not all about technology, and it's not all about hiring talents. It's actually retaining talents is a lot more difficult. Because you hire a talented person, whether it's engineers or marketing, etc. You bring it to the company, you have to have an enabling platform in the company that keep them excited. New generation of talents are really vivid. They do not like similar culture that we had in the past, very stable and continue doing the same thing. It's changing significantly, and they do really love that change. They want to see it, they want to grow, they want to test and try different things. So it is really important that in a talent war, when you do find the right people, you got to really think about how you want to retain them with the right platform, right structure, organization. As Kurt mentioned, one of the things that we have done in tech industry and Intel as well is continuous cultural training, as well as reorganization of traditional different business units inside the company. So in IT, we don't have, as you mentioned, the same thing. We really don't have database engineers, network engineers working on silos. They're all team working to solve the same challenge, especially in cloud computing environment. This has become even more important, that we do have a team that they are all working in a collaborative fashion as a community. So, but changing the culture of isolated environment to a community-driven, it's a challenge all of us have to face.
I think there's also an integration issue here too. And so how do governments create a free flow of this talent from region to region so that you can appeal to a worldwide market as well, not just a local market? I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I almost don't want to answer the question because then you give away the secret. But one of the things that is fortunate for all of us is tech has become the industry to work in globally. So I think the opportunity is all the universities around the world have adjusted their curriculum and have the largest output now is really with some type of technical studies. So what we do is we try and line up with the university. So for our development centers, and a couple of our products actually came out of university PhD work. So we see that, and that is no secret to most of the large tech companies. They've been going near the good universities for years, and you can see them right across the street. So for us, we're up in Umeå, Sweden, which is way, way, way up. But it happens to be 86,000 people in the town and 33,000 are students. So it's just a great place, and we are pick the largest, we're the Apple, the Google, the Microsoft of that town. We're the top employer coming out of it, and it's also coming from, they're attracting an international student body now. So I think one of the strategies is you can pick a handful and go deep in a few universities. Don't do the old campus recruiting that's very thin across a lot of them. Pick one, go deep, get to know how you identify the students early on. And I think there's a lot of places that are not where you can be that top employer. So that would be my advice.
So we said we'd come back and maybe just touch on the theme of regulation. And Parviz, you mentioned the need for regulatory collaboration. I think that's especially true in the financial services sector, right, where we've been dealing with regulation. You mentioned the SEC in the 70s. We've been dealing with regulation for a long time, but this era of innovation and tech change has really brought to the fore the need to collaborate across sectors. So I wonder, Parviz, if you would elaborate a little bit on how you approach RegTech, technology and regulators partnership.
So about 2 or 3 years ago, we have been working with a number of regulators worldwide, but really we got into engagement with MAS, especially I can take that example, and talking about advanced analytics and how advanced analytics can help to address some of the issues, especially when we're talking about AML, fraud detection, KYC. It's become really challenging in the financial industry. AML is no longer just focused on one bank, one region. It's across the world. How do you detect money laundering activities effectively across multiple networks of banks? So that's really was when we come up talking about federated analytics at a time. And we did have a technology that we talked about and worked with MAS, and they really enable a collaboration between us, MAS, and banks that we did a project together to show that technology does work, and going to the next step of finding out gaps, challenges, addressing those, and perfecting the technology. So the major challenges that Mass posed at the time was, well, we can't move data due to data sovereignty. Privacy is important for almost every country now around the world. We are seeing GDPR specifically, but in China is rising, so is everywhere. How do you address those? We don't know the policies. We are a tech company. So there is a regulator who are basically working on policies day in, day out. And banks who are delivering services to customers, they are subject of all these regulations. And they are struggling how to actually effectively addressing those challenges. So that's how we actually work to figure out how to address, in this case, AML, KYC, and fraud detection. And we are seeing, I've seen it in Cyber recently in London, that it is a necessity for us to share information. Now, not necessarily in the form of raw data, but in the form of information that can be expanded across the globe and help the financial institution. I think AML is one of the areas that across financial institutions, they agree, all benefit from. So if we have a better technology to address that, going from 99% false positive to 60%, 40%, that's a massive improvement and reducing cost and better services. So I think that's an example of it. If we get together and define the problem, understanding what it is, we describe technology, banks describe the requirement, and then the use cases. And that's really bringing together all aspects of a technology, regulators, and consumer flows and industries. So.
I think our approach as a global cloud provider really has two elements to it. The first thing is conform with regulations that exist today. And we pride ourselves, Azure is the most compliant financial regulation cloud in the world today. So, and related to that also, you're not going to be able to, in many cases, get around the data sovereignty issues and the local regulations that may be defined by a country. And so we actually build sovereign cloud capability to enable that, so that if there's a need to keep data, keep financial records within a country, we can comply with that. So that's all working within the here and now in the regulatory environment and interpreting that to what the regulators need for each particular market. But then we work with regulators. These regulators need to understand what does AI mean, what does the federation of data mean across multiple providers globally in terms of things like being able to do better fraud protection. There are benefits to their market by virtue of them embracing a new model of regulation, but that's playing the long game. You want to come together with them as to where smart regulation is going to go in the future and help tailor that with an agenda that's helpful for them as well, that has privacy at its core, security at its core.
And if you would, Brad, I'd love to have you answer this question, but also talk about Nasdaq, because in a sense, Nasdaq has its own regulations almost, right? It is sort of as a provider, as part of the financial infrastructure, it does also
self-regulate
the industry.
Yeah, so the interesting and unique position we're in as a tech provider, I was trying to think if there's many other analogs to us in that our franchise is geographic, so we can be in the same business as our customers. And so we get to experience what they experience working with regulators and being a regulator ourselves. So it's somewhat unique. So we have great customer empathy for what works and what doesn't work and the positions you can take. So since we're in Singapore, it would be important. Yesterday we were at an MAS networking lunch, and it was remarkable how the MAS is the one that brought all this together. And so we were asking, so why did you do it? And they said, we really wanted to be forward-thinking and involve a broad and mobilize a broad set of folks to make sure that we continue to see the future and we can keep up with the future. So I thought that was very unique that the regulator is doing that. I was thinking, would our regulator do that? And I'm not sure if they would. They certainly haven't at this point. So hats off to the way that we're thinking about working together is we're a technology provider. SGX is the local exchange provider in Singapore, and MS is the regulator. And there are some things that we can all do together. So I think that's a specific example of where we can be unique and think about making progress. And it's probably going to be more productive because everyone's ready. What we're doing very practically on the home front is with all the major cloud providers, we're working with the SEC on what's called the shared responsibility agreement. And if we're running the exchange and we're putting our exchange technology in the cloud, they expect us to be able to do the same things we're held accountable for today under what's called Reg SCI, so Regulation System Compliance and Integrity. So we're going through that step, and I think that's a necessary step for us to even move anything significant into the cloud. So we're going to do that across all three major cloud providers, so we have choice, and it's a lot of work, it's a lot of extra work. But those are the example. I guess the last one I would say is on AI. We haven't talked much about AI, we talked a lot about cloud. So we use AI, we just announced we've incorporated AI into our surveillance. It's a leading trade surveillance product. And we can do that because if we can get better at spotting fraud, that's a good thing. But if you're using AI to make decisions about credit and who you give accounts to, and there's a big story out there, on another big provider that's going to have to answer some questions, the regulators are going to want to know explainability. So I think that is another really important topic. Just like we're talking about shared responsibility in the cloud environment, the big thing you're going to want to get work with your regulator on is explainability, and how does AI give you an answer you can explain. If not, how do you get to something similar to that? So I think that's a big issue as well.
Absolutely. So we have just over 5 minutes. I want to come back to the things you all said you're sort of most excited about and really push on financial services and what you're seeing happen there. So you mentioned AI, we've talked about cloud, we haven't talked as much about cyber security. But take the thing you mentioned as the thing you're most excited to talk about today, and talk a little bit more about how you're working with maybe with big financial services institutions and guiding them through the adoption of cloud or AI, and maybe some of the challenges or opportunities you see there.
Well, security is one that we haven't talked about, so maybe I'll talk about that one. AI is a fantastic one, but the industry, as we move to the cloud, there's an opportunity to rethink your strategy around security. Historically, we've thought about security as you have this boundary called the intranet, and anything that's basically your first line of defense. And what we found is as cyber threats are becoming more and more sophisticated, that boundary is penetrated all the time. And so you really need to rethink your security approach. And we're very big on an approach the industry is embracing around zero trust networking, which assumes that your boundary of your intranet is not a defense point. And you need to make sure through things like multi-factor authentication that you're in fact talking to the person, and that person is accessing the services they're actually, they are who they say they are, that the device is healthy, and that you have least privileged access or the lowest amount of access rights that are absolutely required for that service. Those are kind of the core elements of zero trust networking. And so we've been working with our customers, describing and talking about how we built the core concepts of ZTN into our products, and what it means, particularly as they move to the cloud, but also to secure their on-premises environment better, as opposed to just having a million different security products and hoping by virtue of all of them together they're secure. That's just, hope is not a strategy. And so how do they move towards a zero trust networking environment, and how can the cloud help them do that? So that's something we haven't talked about that I think is really compelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I agree. So we've been working with Microsoft on technologies like confidential computing. So build a platform from the get-go that is incorporate the security technologies from low-level platform servers all the way up to application-level authentication, as you mentioned. Now, what we are seeing that security is not only a point or is not a focal point of one or two areas. You have to really address them through best practices. DevOps, DevSec that we are talking about, these are philosophies that fundamentally help to develop a healthy technologies. And so in software development, in an operation perspective, so we look at security overall. Now, interesting synergy between AI and all of this conversation is there is a lot of data generated from all of these components that you can analyze and be able to detect anomalies much faster than we used to do. So this is where we are using technologies as a complementary to solving a problem that is going to be there forever. Security, we're never going to enable, we're never going to be able to deliver security 100% at any given time. It's moving target. So that's where this collaboration between us, it's become even more important on every level to be able to address the cybersecurity, which is very sophisticated now.
So maybe I'll finish with where I started. So I mentioned I was pretty excited about APIs, and I think there's something we're working with our customers who are financial services companies to understand what they have that they can expose. That a new, if you think about it, the cloud and APIs together, it's a global distribution capability. It's almost like building an app. When you were in the web business and all of a sudden Apple opened the Apple Store, you had a new way to think about your business and say, do I have something I can put up there? So that's one of the things we're excited about working with our customers and say, what do you have that could be an exposed API? How do we take what we do today with our market technology and make it available for non-financial services companies? So the one that's obvious is market data. So all of our customers generate market data. It's a very valuable product for them, but it's limited consumption today, and then it's redistributed by other third parties. So there's an opportunity to maybe think about a direct model. So rather than have it go through an intermediary, can an API allow them to go direct to some of these new channels? So we think there's an opportunity. That's kind of an exciting new area of market data in the cloud to new upstarts. And certainly most of the fintech companies go, where's your API? You know, are you in Microsoft or you're in Amazon? Can we hit it? And if it's not there, you go, why not?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the topic of partnership and how you can make that a reality. And I think for consumers or for customers, whether retail or institutional, having the safety, having the interoperability, right, being able to make financial decisions based on the data quickly and securely is something we're all working toward. So in our final 2 minutes, we'd love to just go down the line, have you each talk about maybe one big challenge area that you faced and maybe a couple of words of wisdom for the audience about how you've tackled it or how you've approached it.
I guess the thing for us has always been the balancing the old with the new. And the one thing that I think Microsoft really has been a core part of our success is this notion of, and it's particularly true in the financial services industry right now, is the way this industry looks in the future is not going to be like it looks today. Whether you're a large player or a small player, this ability, Microsoft has succeeded and had multiple acts in our life because we've embraced the new and said it is a wholly transformative thing that fundamentally is going to change our business model. And I've been involved in teams that have tens of thousands of people and telling them that, hey, this is the critical business we have today, but balance that with this is the future of where it's going to be, and getting everybody jazzed around that future as you're managing the existing business. It's a tough balancing act, but it's absolutely critical to success and to thrive.
So if this was 2, 3, 4 years ago, it would be AI and blockchain, right? But really, if you ask me today, is data. Data is number one challenge for every institution, small and large. And the problem is data is not as sexy as AI, right? So everybody loves AI, etc. But AI without the data that is being high quality, high volume, and is frequent availability, accessibility, is nothing. Because the largest institution that we've been working with worldwide now, they have done multiple AI projects, some of them successful, some of them failed, but they are in a certain maturity level that they want to expand that across enterprise. And they are running into challenge because there is no fluid data pipeline. They didn't pay attention to data architecture, data infrastructure. So there is an opportunity for Fintech industry to address some of these challenges. And there is a point for paying special attention for financial institutions to solve the data problem. Because if you want to have hundreds of concurrent AI projects and enterprise-wide, you really need to address the data head on and do it now. So that's my message.
Brad, last word.
So I'm in the middle of one right now. So we have very successful, like Microsoft with Office, we have had traditionally very successful on-prem enterprise software products, and the clear move to moving that to the cloud and platform and SaaS business. So that is well chronicled, that it's so hard when you have a successful product to re-engineer that and go through that transformation. So we're about, depending on how you measure it, in either year 3.5 or 4.5. But it's well on its way, but just the pull of the past is always there.
Well, thank you so much to our audience for joining us this morning, and please join me in thanking our wonderful panel.